Do it, Mom. Sign the papers. Daniel's voice was low, but his grip on my hand was merciless. The sharp crack of bone shot fire through my finger, and I gasped. Pain blurred my vision, but I forced tears to spill down my face. He thought he had won. He thought breaking me would bend me. I didn't scream. I let him believe he had crushed me. Inside, I was already writing the ending to his arrogance. The next morning at the bank, Daniel sat in front of the computer, confident, smug, certain I would finally give him what he wanted. His wife, Claire, hovered behind him, lips curved in that practiced smile she used whenever she was calculating her next move. And then, when the screen lit up, when the truth stared back at him, Daniel froze. His hands trembled. His mouth fell open. My son, who thought me weak, saw something he had never imagined. He had no idea the woman he'd tried to break had built her life on silence, patience, and precision. For 5 years since my husband's death, I'd worn the mask of frailty. I perfected the disguise, soft sweaters in muted browns and grays, a cane I didn't truly need, a slight tremor in my voice whenever I spoke of bills or health. I let the world think, poor Margaret, a widow scraping by on a pension. I let neighbors whisper about my struggles. I let my children pity me. Every sigh, every hunched step, every quiet moment at church was part of the performance. But my hands, steady as stone, managed far more than knitting and trembling teacups. My house, small and ordinary on the outside, was a fortress of strategy. My car, old and unassuming, hid the truth of the empire my husband and I built long before he passed. The world underestimated me, and that was my greatest weapon. Daniel, my firstborn, was never content to earn. He preferred shortcuts, schemes, and the thrill of someone else's money in his pocket. Claire, his wife of 3 years, fit him perfectly. She smiled wide at Sunday dinners, brought cheap store-bought pies, and always found a way to slip the conversation toward finances. Margaret, have you thought about retirement homes? You shouldn't be burdened, she'd say, pressing my hand with faux concern. I'd nod, sigh, let my voice waver, and mumble, I don't know what I'd do without you too. Behind that trembling voice, I recorded every detail. The way Daniel's eyes lingered when I pretended to leave bills on the counter. The hunger in Claire's questions about my accounts. The way they came more often, not for love, but for leverage. They thought I was bait. But they were the ones stepping into the trap. But what Daniel and Claire didn't know was that every word, every gesture, every carefully placed hint had been etched into my memory, waiting for the moment I'd turn their ambition into their undoing. That moment arrived just a week ago, on a Tuesday afternoon that is now carved into my mind. They came into my house smiling, though the smiles barely stretched across their faces, carrying a thick folder as though it were a prize they had already won. Mom, we've got incredible news, Claire announced, her voice dripping with sweetness so thick it almost made me choke. Daniel laid the folder on my old coffee table, a piece of furniture I've deliberately kept worn and unimpressive, part of the stage I've crafted for years. From inside, they pulled glossy photographs of a sprawling house, a mansion, really, tucked in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in town. Look at this beauty, Daniel said, sliding the photos toward me as though each picture were a hypnotic charm. 5 bedrooms, 3 baths, a backyard big enough for the kids we're going to have. And a pool, Mom. A pool. Claire leaned in, her eyes shining with rehearsed excitement. And there's a downstairs suite, Margaret. Perfect for you. You could live with us, be comfortable, never have to worry about being alone. Her tone might have fooled anyone else, but I heard the truth beneath it. That room wouldn't have been for my comfort. It would have been my gilded cage, a place to keep me near while they quietly siphoned away everything I had built. For 20 straight minutes, they performed their little act, bouncing between financial jargon and sugary promises. Interest rates, once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, special deals. They painted a picture of a future I could step into with just one signature. "It's a steal, Mom," Daniel pressed, leaning closer, his eyes burning with a greed he didn't bother hiding anymore. "A place like this would normally cost at least 300 grand, but because of some seller issue, it's only 200. It's practically a gift." Claire added quickly, "We just need someone responsible to co-sign. Someone the bank trusts. And of course, we thought of you first." The trap was neat, polished, almost professional. I might have applauded if it hadn't been aimed at me. Instead, I let my shoulders droop. I let my eyes dart nervously over the papers. I even let my voice quiver. "I don't know, kids," I whispered, as though I could barely keep up. "This co-signing, it sounds serious. What does it really mean?" Daniel's hand closed around mine, a calculated gesture of tenderness that made bile rise in my throat. "It just means, Mom, that if for some reason we couldn't make the payments, you'd step in. But that's never going to happen. I've got a solid job. Claire works, too. We've got it under control." I frowned, letting the mask of worry deepen. But if something went wrong, what would happen to my house? To my things? They exchanged a glance, quick, sharp, one they thought I wouldn't catch. Claire's smile wavered, then she forced it back into place. "Oh, nothing bad would happen, Margaret," she said with a nervous laugh. "You'd be with us. We'd take care of you completely. You'd never need to worry about a thing." Her words were sugar-coated poison. What she meant was simple: they would strip me of everything I had, and then keep me under their roof, powerless and dependent. That night, after they left with promises to return the next day and explain the details, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and replayed every second of their performance. They weren't just after a signature. They had crafted something far more insidious. First, trick me into co-signing for a mansion probably worth more than they admitted. Then, accidentally, default on the loan. When the bank came for my house to cover the debt, they'd swoop in, acting like saviors, inviting me into their glittering home, where every ounce of my independence and dignity would quietly vanish. It was a clever plan, I'll give them that. But they had made one fatal error: they believed I was the weak, gullible woman they'd been performing for. Over the next 3 days, while Daniel and Claire thought I was wringing my hands over their offer, I was moving pieces into place. I picked up the phone and called the one person who knows the truth about me, Victoria, my lawyer, a sharp, fearless woman who has safeguarded my affairs for years. "Victoria," I said, my voice calm, steady, the mask finally lifted, "I need you to look into a property. And into 2 people who have no idea who they're playing with." I told Victoria I thought Daniel and Claire were setting me up, and she didn't hesitate. Within the hour, she put me in touch with Thomas, a discreet investigator she had trusted for years. "Follow them," I instructed him over the phone. "I want to know who they're meeting, what papers they're passing around, and I want every detail kept confidential." 48 hours later, Thomas handed me a file that confirmed what my instincts already knew. The house was real, yes, but it was listed at $280,000, not the $200,000 they had so earnestly pitched to me. The extra $80,000. That was their payday, a secret agreement with the seller to pocket the difference once I signed. The report also revealed meetings with a real estate attorney, who had carefully walked them through the mechanics of foreclosure. They weren't just careless, they were deliberate. They were planning to use me as the key that unlocked a scheme that would strip me of my home, my security, and my independence. By Friday evening, When they came back with that same folder tucked under Daniel's arm, I was ready. The trap they thought they had set for me was already collapsing. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, pulled warm cookies from the oven, and welcomed them in with all the sweetness of a grandmother who had finally surrendered. "Kids," I said, letting my voice tremble as I placed the cups on the table, "I've thought long and hard about what you told me, and you're right. You've always looked out for me. You've always been there." The way their faces lit up nearly made me laugh. They believed they'd won. "But," I added carefully, "this is such a big step for someone like me. I need to sit with these papers, read every word, make sure I understand." Daniel's expression tightened, the mask slipping just enough to show the impatience beneath. "Mom, we already explained everything. It's straightforward. All you need to do is sign here, and here." He jabbed his finger against the dotted lines, the warmth gone from his tone. Claire leaned in, her voice just a little too sharp beneath the honey. "The seller's pressuring us, Margaret. If we don't close this weekend, we'll lose the deal." I folded my hands in my lap and sighed. I understand the urgency, but these numbers are so small, I can't quite see them. "Let me get my glasses." I rose slowly, shoulders bent just enough to keep up the act, and shuffled toward my bedroom. Once out of sight, I picked up my phone, opened the message I had prepared days before, and pressed send. "Activate the plan." When I returned, Daniel and Claire were huddled close, whispering with the frantic air of people whose patience was thinning. They straightened quickly when I came back, plastering those fake smiles across their faces again, but the glint in their eyes told me everything. I lowered myself into my rocking chair, glasses perched on my nose, and began to examine the documents with exaggerated care. "Let's see, it says here the property is worth $200,000. I squinted, holding the page close as if struggling. "But down here, these numbers don't match. I don't understand." Daniel moved fast, leaning over me with that forced smile that had long since lost its power. "Mom, those are just bank terms, taxes, fees. Nothing you need to worry about." I nodded slowly, feigning confusion, and pressed again. "It just seems odd. When your father and I bought this house, everything was so simple. Numbers were clear." Claire jumped in, her voice coated in sugar but trembling just enough to betray her nerves. "Everything is more complicated these days, Margaret. Government regulations, you know. The important thing is, we'll take care of everything for you." For half an hour, I danced through the performance, asking questions that seemed naive, pretending to be overwhelmed, wrinkling my brow at lines of text I couldn't understand. Each question was carefully chosen, each pause deliberate. Then, casually, I dropped the one that made them falter. "And what if you two divorced? What would happen to the house then? And to me, as co-signer?" The silence that followed was as sharp as glass. Daniel forced a laugh, too quick. "Mom, come on. Why would you say that? We're great." But Claire's eyes told a different story. Cold, calculating, unguarded for just a moment. There was no trust there, not between them, and certainly not for me. That single flicker was all I needed. Their plan had cracks, and I was ready to split them wide open. I kept pressing, my voice frail but my questions sharp as needles hidden in wool. "What happens if one of you loses your job? What if you get sick? What if the market crashes again like it did years ago?" With every question, their answers unraveled, vague, evasive, desperate. Watching them fumble was like watching two amateurs on stage with no script, trying to bluff their way through a play everyone else already knew the ending to. "Mom, you can't live your life worrying about every bad thing that might happen," Daniel snapped, his voice tight with irritation. For the first time, his mask slipped. You have to trust us. That was when I decided to play my first real card. I let my voice tremble, let my shoulders sag. Daniel, Claire. I'm scared. I'm just an old woman living alone. If something goes wrong, what happens to me? This house is all I have. If I lose it, I'll have nowhere to go. Tears welled in my eyes, not all of them fake. The betrayal of my only son pierced me more deeply than I wanted to admit. In that moment, I wasn't just acting. I was a mother, broken-hearted, begging for reassurance. Any decent son would have knelt down, hugged me, sworn that he would never let harm come my way. But Daniel did none of that. Instead, he shot to his feet and began pacing like a man trapped in a cage. His voice rose, filled with frustration that sounded more like anger than love. Mom, this is ridiculous. We're giving you a chance at a better life, a bigger house, more comfort, a family under one roof. But no, you always have to make things harder, always so negative. Claire, sitting stiffly beside him, tried to smooth things over. But her eyes betrayed her fear. Their plan was crumbling, and they knew it. Then, shifting tactics, Claire sank down next to me, kneeling as though she were my devoted daughter. She took my hands gently, her touch warm but her eyes cold. Margaret, she whispered, her tone syrupy sweet. I understand your fears. It's normal for someone your age to feel anxious. But remember, we're your family. Daniel is your son, your blood. Do you really think we would harm you? Every word was a blade wrapped in silk, meant to cut while sounding like comfort. She pressed on, layering the manipulation. Think of the future. Imagine grandchildren running around that new house. You'd have your own garden, your own private room, your own bathroom. You could spend your last years surrounded by love, not in this old house that keeps falling apart. She was clever. She used my age, my loneliness, even my dreams of grandchildren, as weapons against me. But what she didn't know was that every word, every syllable, was being recorded by the tiny device hidden in the locket around my neck. It looked like an heirloom necklace, harmless, but it was modern technology at its finest. I let the silence hang heavy. I sighed, as though her words had finally worn me down. You're right, I murmured. I'm just a silly old woman, scared of shadows. You are my family. You're all I have left. Their faces lit up instantly. Daniel's shoulders dropped in relief. Claire smiled triumphantly. They believed the battle was won. But I lifted a trembling finger. I just need one more night to think it over. My head doesn't work as fast as it used to. Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but Claire stopped him with a quick squeeze on the arm. She was the more calculating of the two. She pasted on a radiant smile. Of course, Margaret. Take the night. Just don't wait too long, the opportunity won't be there forever. After they left, the quiet of the house wrapped around me like armor. I picked up the phone and dialed Victoria. I have everything I need from the first round, I told her. The recordings are flawless. Now we move to the second phase. Victoria chuckled softly. Margaret, you never cease to amaze me. You're going to teach them a lesson they'll never forget. The next morning, just after sunrise, I sent Daniel and Claire a text. Kids, I've made up my mind. I'm ready to sign. Come whenever you like. Their reply came almost immediately. Perfect, Mom. We'll be there in an hour. Can't wait. I could practically see their faces, glowing with greed, hugging each other as they celebrated their victory. They had no idea that the hour they thought would secure their future would instead unravel everything they had schemed for. I spent that hour in silence, preparing. Every detail mattered. This time, the stage was mine. I slipped into my oldest gray dress, the one that hung loosely and made me look worn and fragile. My hair I left undone, as if I had long stopped caring how I appeared. Even the slight tremor in my hands and the shuffle in my steps were practiced, each detail rehearsed until it felt natural. On the outside, I was the perfect picture of an elderly woman finally giving in. On the inside, I was sharper than ever, a hunter, waiting quietly for her prey to step into the snare. When Daniel and Claire arrived that Saturday morning, they burst into my house brimming with a giddy energy that was almost theatrical. They came armed with folders, glossy pens, and even a cheap bottle of champagne tucked under Claire's arm. They looked like victors arriving to collect their spoils. "Mom, what a beautiful day." Daniel beamed, spreading his arms wide as though he had brought the sunshine in with him. "It's the perfect day to start a new chapter." Claire wore a striking red dress, something I'd never seen her wear before, as if she were dressing for a victory parade. Her smile was too polished, too triumphant. I welcomed them with the nervous warmth they expected. My voice shook as I said, "Oh, kids, I hardly slept last night thinking about all this. But maybe you're right. You understand these things better than I ever could." I gestured toward the living room, where I had already set out coffee in the oldest porcelain cups I owned, chipped and faded, to reinforce the image of a woman with little left to give. Daniel spread the documents across my worn coffee table with all the pomp of a man finalizing a great deal. "Everything is in order, Mom. Look here." He tapped the pages he had marked with neat X's, using a gold pen that looked far too flashy for the moment. "All you have to do is sign on these 3 lines. Simple. 5 minutes, and it's done." Claire leaned forward, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "And after that, we'll take you to a nice lunch. Maybe even celebrate with champagne." I picked up the first document with trembling hands, moving my lips as I pretended to struggle through the words. "Let's see. I hereby guarantee, oh, dear. These big words always make me dizzy." I let my shoulders sag, the performance of a woman lost in legal jargon. But in truth, my eyes were sharp, taking in every clause with the precision of someone who had studied contracts before. And what I found was worse than I had imagined. This wasn't a harmless co-signing. The papers bound me entirely, my house, my savings, even future assets I hadn't yet earned. "Mom, you don't need to worry about the details," Daniel said quickly, his impatience slipping into his tone. "It's all standard. We went through it with our lawyer. Just trust us." But I kept the act going, tilting my head like a confused old woman. "It says here, real and personal property. Does that mean my things too? My belongings?" Claire darted a look at Daniel before pasting on a smile. "No, Margaret, of course not. That's just how they word these things. It only covers the house." Her voice had a tightness she couldn't quite mask. Then she gave a little laugh, too high-pitched to be genuine. "Besides, it won't even matter. We'll make every payment right on time." Lie after lie, each thinner than the last. But I nodded as if reassured, continuing my slow read. I pointed at phrases, asked questions, sighed heavily. For another 10 minutes, I played the part, pausing, frowning, murmuring about how confusing it all was. Finally, I set the papers down and whispered, "Well, if you say it's fine, then it must be fine." My hand shook as I picked up the pen. I brought it close to the first signature line, the ink poised. Then I stopped suddenly. Oh, heavens! How could I forget? I set the pen down with a nervous laugh. I can't possibly sign without my good glasses. These ones are for distance. I'll fetch the right pair. Daniel let out a sharp exhale, barely holding back his irritation. Mom, you don't need special glasses just to sign your name. You've already looked it over. But I was already rising slowly from my chair, keeping my steps unsteady, every motion deliberate. No, no, son. My doctor says never strain my eyes. I'll just be a minute. I shuffled toward my bedroom, leaving them behind. As I moved down the hall, I could hear their voices drop into frantic whispers, hurried and tense, plotting their next move. They had no idea that every second of their performance was unraveling, and I was the one pulling the threads loose. Once I closed the bedroom door, the frail act slipped away like a discarded mask. My fingers moved quickly, sending Victoria the coded message we had agreed on: the birds are in the cage. Then I switched on the second recorder hidden inside my old leather purse, one more layer of insurance. I knew what was coming next would be the kind of evidence no judge or jury could ignore. When I walked back into the living room with my so-called reading glasses, identical to the pair I had just been wearing, I found Daniel pacing like a restless wolf, while Claire tapped her phone with nervous urgency. "Sorry to keep you waiting, dears," I said, my voice all sweetness, my steps a touch unsteady. "You know how us old folks are with our silly routines." I lowered myself into the chair, picked up the pen, and leaned toward the first page as though finally surrendering. But then, as if struck by a thought too tender to ignore, I looked up at them with watery eyes. "Before I sign," I said softly, "I want you to promise me something." They both stiffened. "What is it, Mom?" Daniel asked carefully, suspicion creeping into his voice. I let my words falter as though they came straight from the heart. "Promise me that if anything goes wrong, if you struggle with payments, you'll come to me right away. I don't want you two carrying the burden alone, trying to protect me. Just be honest with me." It was the perfect bait, disguised as a mother's plea. Any true son, any honest daughter-in-law, would have taken that chance to assure me of their love and responsibility. Instead, they walked straight into the snare. Claire spoke first, and her voice dripped with false reassurance. "Oh, Margaret, of course we'd tell you. But honestly, if something ever happened, you'd be far better off living with us in the new house anyway. You wouldn't be alone here. You'd be surrounded by family." Daniel followed without hesitation, his tone brutally practical. "Exactly, Mom. And if the bank had to use your house as collateral, we'd make sure you were cared for. You'd have your own room, food, everything you need. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." Their words, captured by both recorders, were a perfect confession. They hadn't just planned to risk my home, they had already counted on taking it, reducing me to their dependent, stripped of dignity and control. I forced my lips to tremble into a grateful smile. "Oh, children, you're so thoughtful. I don't know what I'd ever do without you." My voice cracked with feigned emotion, though the fury in my chest burned hotter than any grief I had ever known. With a shaking hand, I signed the first document, then the second. When I reached the third, the one that sealed me as fully liable, I paused dramatically. "This one looks awfully complicated," I murmured. "Are you sure it's really necessary?" The desperation in their faces was almost pitiful. "Yes, Mom," Daniel said firmly. "That one's critical. You have to sign it." Claire leaned in, smiling too hard. "It's the most important one, Margaret. Without it, the deal can't go through." So I signed, my pen scratching across the page like a silent victory march. The moment the ink dried, Daniel exhaled like a man who had just cheated death, while Claire actually clapped her hands. It's done, Daniel said, gathering the papers like treasure. Claire wrapped her arms around me, nearly knocking the breath from my chest. You're the best mother-in-law in the world. You've given us the greatest gift. They popped open their bottle of cheap champagne, pouring it into mismatched glasses. They toasted to a future that would never come. For half an hour they chattered about the house, about paint colors, about the holidays we would supposedly spend together. They described my room, my garden, even the birthday parties I would host. Their fantasies were cruel theater, and I let them perform every line while I reviewed, step by step, how my counterattack would dismantle them. At last, they gathered their trophies, the signed documents, and swept out the door with kisses and promises of celebration. I waved them off from the porch, tears shining in my eyes, the picture of a mother overcome with emotion. God bless you both, I said, voice trembling. I hope it all works out. The moment their car disappeared, my entire expression shifted. My smile hardened into steel. I locked the door, picked up the phone, and called Victoria. It's done, I said, my voice steady and sharp. I have their signatures. I have the recordings. And I have their confessions. There was a pause, then the sound of Victoria's low, satisfied laugh. Margaret, she said, you are one dangerous woman. I almost pity them. Almost. The next 3 days tested every ounce of discipline I had. While Daniel and Claire pranced around town, boasting about their new estate and finalizing imaginary plans for a future built on my signature, I stayed quiet, deliberate, and precise. My house became a war room, each hour devoted to weaving the final strands of a trap they would never see coming. Strangely enough, I felt more alive than I had in years. For once, I wasn't the frail widow tucked away in her own home, I was the conductor of an orchestra, arranging every note of justice. On Monday morning, Victoria arrived dressed like any weary government social worker. Her outfit was bland, her ID badge official enough, and she carried a dull gray binder that would bore any passerby. To a neighbor, she looked like another bureaucrat performing a welfare check. But behind my locked front door, the binder opened to a different reality, a carefully constructed dossier of evidence that could dismantle Daniel and Claire's entire scheme. The recordings are airtight, Victoria said, scrolling through the audio files on her device. You've got their voices admitting to financial manipulation, their intent to take your home, and even their backup plan to make you dependent on them. A prosecutor couldn't ask for more. She handed me printed transcripts, each word as sharp as a blade. Then came the photographs, high-resolution shots Thomas had captured of Daniel and Claire entering and leaving their attorney's office, always carrying thick folders. Victoria spread them across my dining table like cards in a high-stakes game. Here, she said, tapping a photo where Claire's face glowed with smug confidence. And here, they met him 3 times in 2 weeks. Every document in their hands relates to foreclosure strategy. They're not hiding their intentions anymore. But the evidence didn't stop there. Victoria had also secured text messages between Daniel and Claire, obtained through her legal contacts. Reading their words made my stomach tighten. The old woman won't know what hit her. We can clear her out in 6 months max. Her antiques alone should fetch enough to cover our debts. Each sentence was another nail in the coffin of their plan. Victoria leaned back, folding her arms. This is just the setup. The real strike lands tomorrow at the bank. Robert is ready. Robert, the bank manager, wasn't just any banker. He was a man of principle, with decades of experience protecting clients from predatory schemes. He'd seen elder financial abuse before, but when Victoria explained my situation, his anger burned hotter than mine. No one takes advantage of a mother like this in my bank, he'd told her. And I believed him. On Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Daniel's voice, forced casualness barely masking his unease, reached me. "Mom, we need you at the bank tomorrow. Just a quick formality. Some final papers." "More papers?" I asked, letting my voice tremble with confusion. "I thought we finished all that on Saturday." "Yes, well, the bank needs to confirm a few details with you directly." Standard protocol. His attempt at reassurance fell flat. I could hear Claire in the background whispering frantically, feeding him lines. That night, I lay awake, not in dread, but in anticipation. Tomorrow was the day the curtain would rise on my performance. I pulled out the cardigan with the missing button, slipped on my old walking shoes, and practiced my slow shuffle across the bedroom floor. I even dusted a little powder across my face to make myself look pale and weary. They wanted a helpless old woman, I would give them one, right up until I didn't. By Wednesday morning, Daniel arrived at my door, smiling too wide. "Claire couldn't make it." "Doctor's appointment," he said quickly. A lie, of course. She was hiding, letting him shoulder the weight of the final act. On the drive, he tried to coach me. "Mom, the manager will ask about your finances. Just keep it simple. Say you understand the responsibilities of being a cosigner. Don't try to impress anyone." I let my voice quiver. "And what if I don't understand a question?" "I'll help," he promised, patting my hand as though I were a child. "I'll be right there." What he didn't know was that every question had been designed with Robert's help to put the spotlight squarely on him and Claire. This was not going to be a formality, it was going to be their undoing. When we arrived at the bank, Robert himself was waiting at his office door. He shook my hand warmly, then turned to Daniel with a professional nod. "Shall we begin?" Daniel didn't notice the steel in Robert's eyes. But I did. And I knew right then, my son was already finished. Robert was a man in his early 50s, the kind of professional whose presence filled a room without effort. His gray suit was crisp, his tie perfectly knotted, and every item in his office seemed intentionally placed, from the neatly stacked folders on his desk to the soft hum of his computer already logged into the bank system. There was no clutter, no distraction, only a sharp air of order and authority. I could feel Daniel shrinking slightly in his chair, his confidence thinning the longer we sat in that environment. "Good morning, Mrs. Margaret," Robert said warmly as he extended his hand. His tone carried both respect and weight. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard quite a bit about you." "Good morning," I answered softly, slipping into my role. My voice trembled ever so slightly, the way an elderly widow might when faced with intimidating paperwork. The meeting began as expected, with Robert carefully outlining the loan's conditions and the responsibilities of a cosigner. I leaned forward, squinting at the documents as though they were foreign scripts, pausing often to ask small questions about simple terms. My performance was flawless, confused enough to seem vulnerable, but still willing to cooperate. Each time I hesitated, Daniel jumped in with rehearsed lines. "Mom understands, she just needs a little extra time. Let's move things along." He wore the smile of a man who thought himself in control, but his eyes betrayed a growing impatience. Robert remained steady, unmoved. After a while, he folded his hands on the desk and asked the question that changed everything. "Mrs. Margaret, before we proceed, the bank is required to verify your financial situation. Could you share details about your accounts and assets?" Daniel stiffened immediately, his chair squeaking as he shifted forward. "Is that really necessary? She's just a retiree. She doesn't have much to disclose." Robert turned his gaze on him, calm but firm. "Sir, this is standard banking law. When someone guarantees a loan of this size, we must confirm their financial capacity. It protects both the client and the institution. I lowered my head as though embarrassed, pulling a faded savings passbook from my purse. It was the one I'd kept for decades, with small deposits and withdrawals carefully maintained to look unimpressive. My hands shook just enough to appear frail as I slid it across the desk. "This is what I have," I whispered. "It's not much, but it's all there." Robert opened the passbook, scanning the modest entries. His expression remained neutral, but then he turned to his computer, typing quickly. Seconds stretched like hours as the only sound in the room was the tapping of keys. Daniel leaned forward, craning his neck. "Well? You see. It's simple. Nothing complicated." But Robert didn't answer him. His eyes flicked across the screen, then he leaned back slightly. "Interesting," he murmured. "Mrs. Margaret, is this truly your only account?" "Yes," I said softly, wide-eyed with staged innocence. "Is there a problem?" Robert lifted his gaze from the screen, adjusting his glasses with deliberate calm. "Not a problem at all. In fact, quite the opposite." He swiveled the monitor so we both could see. On the screen appeared a list of accounts from 3 different banks, each bearing balances that together totaled over $2.9 million. The figures glowed on the display, undeniable and exact. The silence was suffocating. Daniel froze, his mouth slack, his face draining of color. His eyes darted across the numbers, searching desperately for an explanation that wasn't there. Robert continued, his voice carrying a subtle edge. "In addition to these accounts, you also hold investment properties in 2 states, a diversified portfolio of stocks and municipal bonds, and a trust established 5 years ago that provides a steady monthly income of around $15,000. Daniel's breath caught. He turned to me, his voice cracking. "Mom, you told me you lived on a tiny pension. You said you were barely scraping by." He couldn't finish, his words breaking under the weight of the revelation. Robert leaned forward slightly, his tone professional but pointed. "Sir, your mother is what we call a discreet investor. Many seniors prefer to keep their finances private, for reasons of safety and peace of mind. It's not uncommon for those who appear modest to be more secure than they let on." I kept my face soft, innocent, as though confused by the shock in the room. "Have I done something wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling. "My husband always told me not to flaunt money. He said it brings the wrong kind of attention." Robert nodded, respect flickering in his eyes. "Your late husband was absolutely right, Mrs. Margaret. Discretion with wealth is a rare and admirable virtue." Daniel sat motionless, his entire scheme unraveling before his eyes. And for the first time in years, I felt the sweet taste of power settle over me like a crown I had quietly kept hidden all along. The look on Daniel's face was a story in itself, shock, disbelief, and a growing dread that twisted his features into something almost unrecognizable. His eyes darted between the computer screen and me, as though the numbers on display were a hallucination he couldn't blink away. "Mom," he croaked, his voice thin, hollow, like it had traveled 1,000 miles to reach me. "You knew about all this money." I kept my sweet, fragile smile intact, the very picture of an elderly woman too modest to understand the fuss. "Of course, dear. Your father always taught me that money is not for boasting about. Talking about it in public is bad manners." Robert leaned back in his chair, savoring the silence. He adjusted his glasses and continued in his calm, methodical tone, the way an accountant might read off a ledger. "In addition to the balances we've already reviewed, I see certificates of deposit totaling $500,000 maturing next spring, and an international account I won't detail here for privacy reasons. But suffice it to say, the amount is substantial." Each word struck Daniel like a hammer. His earlier confidence, the swagger of a son who believed he'd cornered his aging mother, crumbled into visible desperation. He opened his mouth twice before sound finally came out. "Why?" His voice cracked into something closer to a child's. "Why did you live like you had nothing? Why did you complain about bills? About repairs? Why borrow money from me?" His tone rose with each question, not out of concern, but as if I had betrayed him. I folded my hands gently in my lap and looked at him with a patience that only deepened his discomfort. "Because, my love, your father always told me, the best way to know someone's heart is to see how they treat you when they think you have nothing to give. It's the truest measure of a person's character." The weight of those words settled over him, heavier than any number on the screen. He realized then, not only had I been comfortable all along, I had been quietly watching, testing. Waiting to see if love or greed would guide him. And he had failed. For years, I continued softly, but with an edge he could not miss. I hoped one of my children would visit me simply because they loved me, not because they wanted something in return. Robert, perfectly cued as we had planned, leaned forward with just the right mix of professionalism and moral weight. "Mr. Daniel," he said, his voice even but sharp, "given your mother's actual financial position, are you certain you wish to continue with this loan arrangement?" It was a lifeline, a chance for Daniel to retreat, apologize, reclaim a shred of dignity. A wiser man would have taken it. But Daniel was ruled by something far stronger than wisdom, his greed. "Of course we want to proceed," he snapped, his voice hard, defensive. "My mother already signed. She agreed to co-sign. If she has this kind of money, then there's no risk at all, is there?" His tone carried the false bravado of someone clinging to a collapsing scheme. It was the perfect confession. He hadn't chosen remorse or gratitude, he had chosen arrogance and entitlement, before a witness, no less. "You're absolutely right, son," I replied with a serene smile that looked maternal but felt like victory. "There's no risk at all." Robert nodded, his face unreadable but his eyes glinting with satisfaction. He pulled out a fresh folder, thicker than the last, and placed it in front of Daniel. "Very well, then. Let's finalize this process. Mr. Daniel, I'll need your signature on these additional documents." Daniel barely glanced at the papers, still too rattled by the revelation of my fortune. He signed one page, then another, flipping through with the distracted eagerness of someone desperate to get it over with. "What exactly am I signing here?" he muttered as his pen scratched across another line. "Standard protocol," Robert answered smoothly, his voice carrying the unshakable authority of a man who had overseen thousands of transactions. But these weren't just routine papers. Hidden among them were affidavits confirming his intent, waivers of liability, and, most importantly, authorizations granting the bank permission to record every detail of this process for fraud prevention purposes. And Daniel, blinded by greed, signed them all. Declarations of good faith, acknowledgments of responsibility, authorizations for additional reviews. Each page Daniel signed was another lock clicking shut on the trap he had walked into. His pen moved quickly, carelessly, too blinded by greed and panic to understand that every flourish of his signature would one day stand as evidence against him. When the paperwork was complete, Robert rose with the dignity of a man who had seen too many schemes cross his desk. He shook my hand warmly, his tone carrying a sincerity that was impossible to miss. "Mrs. Margaret, it has been an honor. Your husband must have been a very wise man to leave you with such prudence and discretion." Then Robert turned to Daniel, and his polite smile shifted ever so slightly into something sterner. "Sir, I hope you understand the rare blessing you have in a mother like this. Very few people are as fortunate." Daniel nodded stiffly, but his jaw was clenched tight. He looked like a man who had swallowed glass. The drive back to my house was heavy with silence, as though the air itself had thickened. Daniel gripped the wheel, his knuckles bone white, his mind clearly racing. His pride had been cracked wide open, and now the anger and fear seeped out like water from a broken pipe. 2 blocks from my house, he finally erupted. "Mom, I can't believe you lied to me all these years. I thought you were struggling, I thought you had nothing. I worried about you." I kept my voice soft, but there was an edge to it now, a steel he had never heard before. "You worried about me? Is that what you call it, showing up with Claire, trying to bully me into signing papers for a house you could never afford? Is that why, when I refused, you grabbed me so hard you broke my finger? Was that your way of showing concern?" The color drained from his face instantly. He looked like a ghost sitting behind the wheel. "Mom, I didn't mean, I was under pressure. I wasn't thinking. I never wanted to hurt you." His words stumbled over each other, weak and hollow. "And yet," I said evenly, "you did hurt me. And not just my hand." He swallowed hard and tried again, his voice grasping at excuses. "Besides, Claire and I thought maybe living with us would be better for you. That old house isn't good for someone your age. We thought we could give you a better quality of life, in your final years." "My final years," I repeated, letting the words hang between us like a blade. "You've already written my ending for me, haven't you?" The car rolled to a stop in front of my house, but neither of us reached for the door. I turned to face him fully, my voice firmer than it had been in years. "Daniel. Did you think I wouldn't notice that your visits grew more frequent only after your debts piled up? That Claire's sudden interest in my will was a coincidence? You thought you were clever. But I've been watching." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off with a sharpness that made him flinch. "Do you really think a woman who built and protected a fortune of nearly $3 million wouldn't notice when her own child was trying to strip her bare?" The silence was brutal. At last, he lowered his head to the steering wheel, defeated, his voice breaking. "I didn't know what else to do. Claire and I are drowning. We're buried in debt. I thought if you had this house, if something happened, we could step in. We could take care of you, Anne. And take everything I own," I finished for him, my tone icy and merciless. "Yes, Daniel. I know exactly what you were planning." I opened the car door with the steady calm of someone who had already won the war. Rising from the seat, I felt no tremor in my step, no trace of the frailty I had performed for so long. I was not a victim, I was the judge. He sat slumped behind the wheel, his hands gripping it as if it were the only thing tethering him to this earth. "Mom, wait," he called after me, desperation cracking his voice. "We can fix this. We need to talk." I paused at my gate, my back to him, and let my reply fall like ice. "Some things, Daniel, can't be fixed. There's nothing left to mend, Daniel. You made your choice the moment you treated me as a hurdle instead of a mother." I stepped into my house and closed the door, not with the kind of dramatic slam he might have braced himself for, but with a quiet, final click. The sound carried more weight than anger, it was the sound of something sealed forever. From the window, I watched him linger in the driveway. He sat there, unmoving, for nearly 10 minutes as though waiting for me to step outside, to soothe his guilt, to slip back into the nurturing mother who had always made room for his failures. But that woman no longer existed. She had been buried the moment he twisted my hand and shattered my finger. What remained was someone harder, someone who had no illusions left. When his car finally disappeared around the corner, I dialed Victoria. "Phase 1 is complete," I told her calmly. "I've got his full confession recorded in the car. I have his reaction to the truth about my finances. And I have him admitting he'll still push forward with this scam despite knowing everything. Victoria chuckled, that razor-edged laugh that could cut through steel. Margaret, you're colder than most attorneys I've met. Now comes the enjoyable part. The next 2 days were a masterclass in self-deception. Daniel and Claire wove themselves into a cocoon of denial so thick they seemed almost proud of it. Thomas, my private investigator, kept me updated on their every move. Instead of rethinking their scheme, they doubled down as though they had already won. They treated the knowledge of my fortune not as a warning but as a ticket to fast-track their fantasy life. They're acting like they hit a jackpot, Thomas reported. Yesterday, they spent over $4,000 on a new living room set. All of it on credit. By Thursday morning, Claire had the audacity to call me herself. Her voice oozed that syrupy mix of false concern and rehearsed affection. Margaret, I'm worried about you. Daniel came home shaken after the bank visit. He says you're angry with us. I played my role with flawless confusion. Angry? No, sweetheart. Why would I be angry? I'm just surprised you two want to go forward with buying the house now that you know I'm not the poor widow you assumed I was. Her hesitation on the other end was delicious. It's just that. Margaret, money doesn't change how we feel. We love you the same, whether you have a lot or a little. The lie was so shameless I almost wanted to applaud. Of course, dear, I replied sweetly, letting the venom hide beneath the sugar. True love isn't measured in money. That's why I'm sure if I truly were the penniless woman you believed me to be, you would have cared for me exactly the same, wouldn't you? Her silence said everything, though she finally forced out, of course we would. We've always wanted to take care of you. But her voice was as hollow as a drum struck in an empty room. We both knew the truth. If I had been poor, they would have left me to wither in my old house while they built their shiny new life elsewhere. By Friday night, the visit I'd been expecting came. Daniel arrived alone, carrying the look of a man broken by the weight of his own choices. There was no arrogance left, no aggression, only a desperate son who had finally realized just how badly he'd destroyed everything. Mom, he said at the doorway, his voice small. Can we talk, please? I let him in, but gone were the days of offering coffee, cookies, or the comfort of my couch. I sat in my chair, the one that had always been mine, and let the silence press on him until he spoke. Mom, he began, his voice trembling, I know I've made terrible mistakes. I hurt you. I lied to you. I tried to take advantage of you. Each word sounded as if it carved into his own throat. But I was desperate. Claire and we're drowning in debt. We're about to lose everything. And I thought that you. You thought what, Daniel? My voice was sharper than I had ever allowed it to be. That I was a naive old woman you could bully into signing anything. That breaking my finger would frighten me into obedience. That years of your conditional affection, given only when you needed something, had fooled me into believing you truly cared. Every question struck him like a blow. His shoulders flinched, his hands shook, his face collapsed under the weight of shame. He tried again, but the words faltered. I thought maybe you wouldn't notice. Wouldn't notice. My tone cut him clean. I noticed everything. Every calculated visit. Every greedy glance. Every question Claire asked about my will. And did you really believe a woman who built and protected a fortune of nearly $3 million would fail to see when her own son was plotting against her? Daniel bowed his head into his hands, looking like a boy instead of the man who had tried to strip me of my dignity. For the first time, I saw not just his guilt but his defeat. And I did not reach out to save him. No, Mom. I do love you, Daniel pleaded, his voice cracking under the weight of his own lies. I've always loved you. It's just, the circumstances. The circumstances, I repeated, each syllable laced with contempt. Daniel, since your father passed 5 years ago, you have come to see me exactly 23 times. Do you know how many of those visits ended with you asking for money? His lips trembled, but I didn't give him the chance to answer. 21. 21 out of 23. And you expect me to believe that's love? The numbers were exact because I had counted them, noted them, etched them into my memory like wounds that never healed. But I always meant to pay you back, he stammered, his voice climbing with panic. Things have been hard, but I always thought that once things turned around. Daniel, I cut in sharply. In 5 years, you have borrowed $18,400. You have not repaid a single cent. Not once did you ask how I was coping. Not once did you care if I was lonely in this big house, or if I needed anything beyond your next loan. The only time you darkened my door was when your credit cards were maxed out. The silence that followed pressed down heavy, but we bore it for very different reasons. He was breaking because the truth stripped him bare. I was breaking because saying it aloud brought into the light every shard of pain I had carried in silence for years. Finally, he whispered, "What do you want me to do? How can I fix this?" That was the question I had waited for, the question that would determine if there was even a sliver of redemption left for him. "I want you," I said, my voice slow and deliberate, "to cancel the purchase of that house immediately." His face collapsed as if I had asked him to carve out his own heart. "I want you to tell Claire the truth about what you tried to do to me. And I want you to get real help for your debts, professional help, instead of trying to rob your mother." Every demand was logical. Every demand was fair. But to him, they sounded like execution orders. "Mom, you can't ask me to do that," he burst out, his desperation now edged with hysteria. "We've already signed the contracts. We've already made plans. Claire's told her whole family about the new house. If we back out now, we lose the down payment, we lose everything we've worked for. And Claire." He stopped himself, but it was too late. He had revealed the truth. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about Claire's disappointment and about his image crumbling in front of her family. "Ah," I said with a smile that was sharper than any scream. "Now I see. Your fear isn't about betraying your mother. Your fear is that Claire will finally see you for what you are, not the successful man she thought she married, but a failure who tried to leech off his own mother." That was the death blow. Even in this moment, even after all his begging, his repentance was nothing more than self-preservation. Daniel lurched to his feet, and for a moment, I thought he might lash out as he had before. My body tensed, bracing. But instead, he stumbled to the door, his steps uneven, his dignity shattered. "This isn't over, Mom," he muttered, his hand on the doorknob, refusing to look at me. "You signed those papers. You're on the loan. If we can't pay, the bank will come for you. And then you'll need us. You'll need me." It was a threat, naked and pitiful, but a threat all the same. "You're right, Daniel," I said, my voice calm as stone. "This isn't over. But it won't end the way you think." When the door closed behind him, the house sank into silence. I sat there in the shadows of my living room, feeling a strange fusion of sorrow and steel. The mother in me grieved the son I had lost forever. But the woman in me, the fighter, was ready for the war ahead. On Monday morning, right at 9 o'clock, the phone rang. Victoria's voice crackled with the electricity of a storm about to break. "Margaret," she said, wasting no time. "It's time to show your son what it means to challenge a woman who understands power." Her words carried the cadence of command, not counsel. She wasn't speaking like an attorney to a client. She was speaking like a general ready to march into battle. Over the weekend, while Daniel and Claire celebrated their imagined triumph, Victoria and her team had been building. Quietly, methodically, relentlessly. "We have everything," she told me, satisfaction clear in every word. "The recordings, the signatures, the timelines. By the time we're finished, no bank, no court, no one will question where the truth lies." And in that moment, I realized, Daniel thought he had trapped me with his loan. But it was he who had stepped into a cage I built piece by piece, and the door had just locked shut. "No, Mom. I do love you," Daniel pleaded, his voice cracking under the weight of his own lies. "I've always loved you. It's just, the circumstances." "The circumstances," I repeated, each syllable laced with contempt. "Daniel, since your father passed 5 years ago, you have come to see me exactly 23 times. Do you know how many of those visits ended with you asking for money?" His lips trembled, but I didn't give him the chance to answer. 21. 21 out of 23. "And you expect me to believe that's love?" The numbers were exact because I had counted them, noted them, etched them into my memory like wounds that never healed. "But I always meant to pay you back," he stammered, his voice climbing with panic. "Things have been hard, but I always thought that once things turned around." "Daniel," I cut in sharply. "In 5 years, you have borrowed $18,400. You have not repaid a single cent. Not once did you ask how I was coping. Not once did you care if I was lonely in this big house, or if I needed anything beyond your next loan. The only time you darkened my door was when your credit cards were maxed out." The silence that followed pressed down heavy, but we bore it for very different reasons. He was breaking because the truth stripped him bare. I was breaking because saying it aloud brought into the light every shard of pain I had carried in silence for years. Finally, he whispered, "What do you want me to do? How can I fix this?" That was the question I had waited for, the question that would determine if there was even a sliver of redemption left for him. "I want you," I said, my voice slow and deliberate, "to cancel the purchase of that house immediately." His face collapsed as if I had asked him to carve out his own heart. "I want you to tell Claire the truth about what you tried to do to me. And I want you to get real help for your debts, professional help, instead of trying to rob your mother." Every demand was logical. Every demand was fair. But to him, they sounded like execution orders. "Mom, you can't ask me to do that," he burst out, his desperation now edged with hysteria. "We've already signed the contracts. We've already made plans. Claire's told her whole family about the new house. If we back out now, we lose the down payment, we lose everything we've worked for. And Claire." He stopped himself, but it was too late. He had revealed the truth. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about Claire's disappointment and about his image crumbling in front of her family. "Ah," I said with a smile that was sharper than any scream. "Now I see. Your fear isn't about betraying your mother. Your fear is that Claire will finally see you for what you are, not the successful man she thought she married, but a failure who tried to leech off his own mother." That was the death blow. Even in this moment, even after all his begging, his repentance was nothing more than self-preservation. Daniel lurched to his feet, and for a moment, I thought he might lash out as he had before. My body tensed, bracing. But instead, he stumbled to the door, his steps uneven, his dignity shattered. "This isn't over, Mom," he muttered, his hand on the doorknob, refusing to look at me. "You signed those papers. You're on the loan. If we can't pay, the bank will come for you. And then you'll need us. You'll need me. It was a threat, naked and pitiful, but a threat all the same. You're right, Daniel, I said, my voice calm as stone. This isn't over. But it won't end the way you think. When the door closed behind him, the house sank into silence. I sat there in the shadows of my living room, feeling a strange fusion of sorrow and steel. The mother in me grieved the son I had lost forever. But the woman in me, the fighter, was ready for the war ahead. On Monday morning, right at 9 o'clock, the phone rang. Victoria's voice crackled with the electricity of a storm about to break. Margaret, she said, wasting no time. It's time to show your son what it means to challenge a woman who understands power. Her words carried the cadence of command, not counsel. She wasn't speaking like an attorney to a client. She was speaking like a general ready to march into battle. Over the weekend, while Daniel and Claire celebrated their imagined triumph, Victoria and her team had been building. Quietly, methodically, relentlessly. We have everything, she told me, satisfaction clear in every word. The recordings, the signatures, the timelines. By the time we're finished, no bank, no court, no one will question where the truth lies. And in that moment, I realized, Daniel thought he had trapped me with his loan. But it was he who had stepped into a cage I built piece by piece, and the door had just locked shut. You are very fortunate to have such a mother, Robert said warmly, settling into his role. Before we go forward with this transfer, I replied, my voice trembling with what sounded like emotion, I'd like to say a few words. Daniel, Claire, and Robert leaned back in their chairs, expectant, like an audience before the curtain rose. For the past several years, I began, keeping my tone steady, I have been watching, listening, and taking stock. A mother always wants to believe the best about her children, but she must also prepare herself for the worst. Daniel and Claire nodded, their faces soft with the assumption that I was about to offer some sentimental speech about sacrifice and family. Daniel, I said suddenly, locking eyes with him, do you remember when you broke my finger because I refused to co-sign your loan? The blood drained from his face instantly. Claire whipped her head toward him in disbelief, her eyes wide with horror. Clearly, he had never shared that part of his past with her. Do you also remember, I continued mercilessly, when you told me that if anything went wrong, I would be better off giving you my house and living under your roof as a dependent? Now Claire's face paled as well, her painted smile cracking into panic. Robert's expression hardened into professional concern. Excuse me, he said sharply, his ceremonial tone gone. Did I just hear correctly? Mr. Daniel, is it true there was physical violence involved in this matter? Daniel stammered, his voice breaking. No, it wasn't like that. We argued, and things got out of hand. It was an accident. But Robert was already making notes, his face grave. Claire's eyes narrowed at her husband, her trust visibly unraveling in front of us all. Mrs. Margaret, Robert asked, do you have medical documentation of this injury? Yes, I replied evenly. From my purse, I produced the X-rays and medical report Victoria had instructed me to preserve. I placed them on the desk with deliberate calm. Here is the official proof. As if on cue, the office door swung open. 2 uniformed police officers entered, followed by Victoria, resplendent in a navy suit that broadcast unshakable authority, and a man I did not recognize but who clearly carried weight. Good morning, Victoria announced, her voice filling the room. I am Mrs. Margaret's attorney. These officers are here with warrants for financial fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit theft. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above us. Daniel Miller and Claire Miller, the taller officer declared, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit financial fraud against a senior citizen, extortion, and, in Mr. Miller's case, physical assault against a vulnerable adult. The click of the handcuffs closing around Daniel's wrists was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. His face twisted as disbelief, denial, horror, realization, and despair washed over him in a brutal sequence. "Mom," he cried as the officers pulled him from his chair. "This is a mistake. You can't do this, I'm your son." His voice cracked on the final word, as though he had only now realized that his title of son no longer gave him immunity. Claire's composure disintegrated into shrieking hysteria. She thrashed against the officer holding her. "This can't be happening. Margaret, you're insane. We were trying to help you. Daniel would never hurt you." Each frantic denial only dug her deeper, her words nothing but evidence of her complicity. Victoria walked to my side, her smile tight with satisfaction, her eyes gleaming with the knowledge that justice had been carried out with surgical precision. "Margaret," she whispered, "this will go down as one of the cleanest cases of poetic justice we've ever handled. Not only did we stop them from defrauding you, but we spared them from losing everything to a fraudulent property scheme. You've been vindicated in every way." The man who had entered with her stepped forward. He extended his hand with a quiet dignity that carried more weight than any speech. "Detective Thomas Rodriguez," he said, his voice firm yet respectful. "I specialize in crimes against seniors. Mrs. Margaret, what you did here today took extraordinary strength. You didn't just protect yourself, you struck a blow for every parent who has ever been betrayed by their own child. For the first time in years, I felt my heart ease. Justice had arrived, not only for me, but for the countless unheard voices of others who had suffered in silence. Your case is going to change lives," Detective Rodriguez told me with quiet conviction. "The recordings you gathered, the way you tracked every detail, the patience you showed in letting them trap themselves, it's the kind of precision work investigators dream about. You didn't just protect yourself. You built a case that will help dozens of other victims." His words struck me with a force stronger than any courtroom gavel. For the first time, I realized my suffering hadn't been wasted. It had been transformed into something greater, a weapon against predators who had counted on the silence of the elderly. When the officers led Daniel and Claire away, the room was left in an eerie calm. Just minutes earlier it had been chaos, shouts, denials, the clatter of handcuffs. Now only Robert, Victoria, and I remained, the air heavy with the aftermath. "Now," Victoria said, opening a thick folder with deliberate care, "comes the part that's going to shock you most." She spread papers and photographs across the polished desk. "We discovered that Daniel and Claire have been at this for years. You weren't their first target, Margaret. You were simply their biggest." The words landed like a blow to the chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, though deep down, dread already supplied the answer. Victoria tapped the photographs one by one. Claire's own mother, 82 years old, showing early signs of Alzheimer's, lent them $50,000 for the down payment on their apartment. Daniel's widowed uncle was pressured into co-signing a car loan they never repaid. An elderly neighbor loaned them $15,000 for fake medical bills. Claire's godmother gave them $30,000 for a business that never existed. It was no accident, no isolated lapse in morality. It was a pattern, a career built on exploiting the trust of older people who loved them. Robert, who had been listening intently, finally spoke. "Mrs. Margaret, what you did today wasn't just about your own safety. You stopped a criminal operation that could have gone on victimizing seniors for years." His words sank deep. My fight, which had begun as a mother's personal battle for survival, had become something bigger, justice for those who had no voice. The weeks that followed were a blur of headlines and flashing cameras. Reporters swarmed my lawn, news anchors spoke my name. The grandmother who outfoxed the scammers, one article read. 70-year-old widow brings down family fraud ring. Invitations poured in from talk shows, magazines, even book publishers. But what meant most to me were the calls, phone calls from seniors across the country, people who had been cheated, ignored, or abandoned by their own families. They thanked me. They told me my story gave them courage to fight back. 3 months later, I received a call I never could have imagined. A representative from the United States Senate spoke with a warmth that made my hands tremble around the receiver. Mrs. Margaret, you've been selected to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Your courage has inspired new legislation for elder protection, and you've given thousands of victims hope. The day of the ceremony felt like stepping into another world. A year earlier, I'd been pretending to be a frail widow counting pennies in her kitchen. Now, I stood at a podium in Washington, a medal draped around my neck by the President of the United States. My speech was simple, but it came from the marrow of my bones. Never underestimate a woman who decides she will no longer be a victim. Age is not weakness. Age is wisdom. And wisdom, when used well, is the sharpest weapon there is. The real satisfaction, however, came months later when Victoria called with the final verdict. Daniel had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud, extortion, and assault on a senior citizen. Claire received 4 years for conspiracy and complicity. Both left the courthouse in shackles, their reputations ruined, their futures sealed. They would never again hold positions where they could handle money or care for vulnerable people. But the true victory lay in restitution. The judge ordered that all the money they had stolen be returned, with interest. I contributed from my own wealth to make sure every victim was made whole. Claire's mother received not just her $50,000 back, but an additional $20,000 earmarked for medical care. Daniel's uncle, their neighbor, Claire's godmother, all of them were compensated. Justice had been served. My personal vengeance had grown into something far greater, a legacy that proved experience, determination, and truth could dismantle even the most ruthless deceit. Daniel's uncle didn't just get his money back. Thanks to the court's restitution order and the funds we helped marshal, his mortgage was wiped clean. That moment crystallized for me what this victory could become: restoration, not just retribution. With the remainder of my assets, I launched the Eleanor Foundation for Elder Protection, the nation's first nonprofit dedicated exclusively to uncovering, preventing, and prosecuting family financial abuse. I staffed it with people I trusted. Victoria took the helm as legal director, bringing a courtroom ruthlessness tempered by fierce compassion. Thomas became director of investigations, his little black book and quiet persistence proving invaluable. Robert, who had been impeccable throughout the bank drama, agreed to run financial operations and compliance. Together we were a compact, fearsome team, seasoned professionals who had seen the worst people could do and decided to spend their lives stopping it. A year later I sat behind a modest desk in an office no larger than my old sitting room, but with a view of a small, carefully tended garden where clients sometimes came to sit and breathe easier after a long legal fight. On the wall hung my medal from the White House, framed beside photographs of the 37 families we'd helped reclaim more than $2 million from relatives and scammers. Each frame told a story of fear turned to relief. That afternoon I was reviewing intake forms when my phone buzzed. The caller identified herself as Martina. She was 65 and sounded like someone who had been holding her breath for months. Her son had been helpful at first, fixing gutters, taking out the trash, but over time his visits multiplied when his own finances went south. The conversations drifted toward wills, costly repairs, and what would happen if she moved somewhere smaller. Martina's voice wavered. "Mrs. Eleanor, I heard your interview on the radio," she said. "I think my son is trying to push me into selling the house so he can grab what's left." I listened, every detail mattered. The cadence of her fear, the pattern of increased visits and pointed questions about inheritance, these were the same threads we had pulled apart in Daniel's case. I felt again that old, sober clarity: predators often wear the face of family. "You did the right thing by calling," I told her, steady and certain. "We'll take this carefully and quickly. Don't sign anything. Don't move any money. Keep a record of every visit and every conversation. We'll open a case, and Thomas will begin surveillance discreetly. Victoria will assess your documents and prepare protective measures. You are not alone." As I walked Martina through the first practical steps, what to document, who to avoid, how to speak to banks if approached, I felt the same purpose that had carried me through the months of court dates and news cameras: responsibility to turn my pain into protection for others. When I hung up, I glanced at the photographs on the wall, at the faces of people whose lives had been returned to them. The work never ended. The predators would keep scheming until someone stopped them. Now, with lawyers, investigators, and a bank manager who knew how to read a predatory pattern, we were that stop. Some predators are clever. Some are cruel. But in this corner of the world, family no longer meant a free pass, and for many, that made all the difference.